And welcome back to Retro Wrestling Games Presents. My name is Alex G, and along with me, as always, is Matt Riley. How you doing tonight, Matt?
Oh yeah, brother! What? I don't know, I'm alright.
Tonight's episode, we're going to take a look at WCW versus the World for the PlayStation 1. WCW versus the World was released in February of 1997 for the PlayStation 1. This was the first THQ WCW video game. They would go on to release other notable titles like WCW NWO Revenge, No Mercy, WrestleMania 2000s, which are all fantastic wrestling games. So this is kind of where they kind of start a little bit with this engine, with these games. So overall, the game plays relatively well. The graphics are pretty well defined for the time. Again, folks, this is PlayStation 1 we're talking about. So this is the birth of the 3D video games in this form. So, overall, I think there's not a whole lot of replay value. There's only one unlockable character, which is Jeff Jarrett, which is some, I guess. But it does give you some different gameplay modes, which include League Challenge, Best of 7, Exhibition, Tournament Mode, League, and Double Title. So a lot of these are characteristics of Japanese wrestling because this is based on a Japanese wrestling game. The Japanese wrestling game that we're referring to is Virtual Pro Wrestling. There is also Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 for the Nintendo 64, which is fantastic, and the greatest wrestling game of all time, which is Virtual Pro Wrestling 2. We'll get into those during another episode. Now, quickly, I just want to run through the roster for this game, and there's going to be some names that you know and some names that you don't know. Some of the names have been changed due to copyright reasons, but their appearances are just about the same, so we'll go over those as well. So your WCW roster is Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Hulk Hogan, Lex Luger, Chono, Ric Flair, Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, Lord Steven Regal, Sting, Ultimo Dragon, The Unknown, I don't know who that is, and the unlockable Jeff Jarrett. Now they also have Empire Wrestling Federation, which is a pseudonym for All Japan Pro Wrestling, and they consist of Gary Albright, Stan Hansen, Fujinami, Kawada, Saruda, Kenta Kobashi, Giant Baba, Steve Williams, and Masawa. Next up is the Samurai Wrestling Federation, which is a pseudonym for Pancrase or the UWF. We have Inoue, Akira Madia, Scott Norton, Fujiwara, Takada, Ken Shamrock, Bash Rutten, Funaki, Yamakaze. Then they have the Dead and Alive organization, which is FMW and War. And we have Tarzan Godo, Sabu, Hayabusa, Koji Katara, Onita, Tenru. And then we have the Independent Union, which is Michinoku Pro Wrestling. And we have Taka Michinoku, Great Sasuke, Kensuke Sasaki, Jinsei Sasaki, Tenzan. And last but not least, we have Neo Strong Wrestling, which is New Japan Pro Wrestling. So they have Liger, Muda, Sasaki, Hase, Hashimoto, Riki Choshu, Muda, Road Warrior Hawk, also known as Overdose in the game. Real interesting there. And the Dynamite Kid. 51 wrestlers on the roster, pretty expansive, and the concept of the game is going to be WCW taking on the best from around the world.
Okay.
So those are the pertinents of the game. So Matt, I know you see some clips of the game. I'm not sure if you actually played this game back for the PlayStation 1, but what were your thoughts?
Well, I think first of all that game engine wise, like I was looking at some of the stuff and it showed like the little. I was pretty upset that Ahmed Johnson wasn't in there, but that's another story.
We'll get to that on WWF Warzone.
I will say this though, fun true fact: there is several companies in the area with double J in their name, and I cannot drive by without saying JEFFJARRE that's double J, Jeff Jarrett. Because I grew up on WWE.
Yes.
I like that when they have a lot of wrestlers in there. I enjoy that because it gives some flexibility. If you played games like, remember NES Pro Wrestling, you had like 8 wrestlers to choose
Right.
from. This gives you a lot of flexibility. That's a nice bonus. You also go, holy shit, was Lex Luger jacked?
He was absolutely. And this was one of the first games in terms of WCW that had the full motion video. Very notable in their introduction video of the game, which is fantastic. So this was a time, again, the game was released in '96 in Japan, '97 everywhere else, and this is pre-NWO, although Sting is clearly in his Crow attire in the game, and on the cover art, no Kevin Nash and Scott Hall in the game. So I would assume, sort of, if you want to, like the timeline games a little bit, where they actually happened in the company's history. So I'm going to say this game probably takes place in late 95-ish, earliest 96s. And why that's notable is that we're going to talk about the pre-NWO WCW. Now, why that's notable is in 1994, Hulk Hogan made his appearance. He finally went to the dark side, brother, and went over to WCW. Now, with the current state of the NBA, and we see big star moving from one team to the other, what do you think the significance of Hogan not returning back to the WWF and going to the competitor WCW?
Well, I think for him, it was probably the best thing he could do to refreshen his character. I mean, I think, WCW, it was the dark side, whatever, but it gave new life in a sense where I was like, okay, some new fans, and I think they made a lot of mistakes with him anyways, but it did kind of revamp for a short time, It's one of those things where it's like, you see a popular comedy show and the actors split up and one guy does a movie and it bombs, and the other guy does another show, it's almost the same exact show. Like, for example, the King of Queens, Kevin James, has a new show coming out that is the fat husband with a hot wife and a daughter. So it's like King of Queens 8 years later, essentially. Same exact premise. Well, Hogan being the, oh yeah, you got it, good guy.
Now, do you remember when they first got him, they had the contract signing and the big parade at Disney?
I remember that.
Because Disney had a deal with WCW. They were doing WCW Saturday Night Live. Well, not live. It was taped 6 weeks out. But taped from the MZM studios in Disney World. So they had a working relationship with Disney, which is kind of odd to think about wrestling and Disney together, but for a period of time in the 90s they were. And another interesting note about Bash of the Beast 94, which was Hulk Hogan's debut, by the way. So in his first match he's wrestling for the world title. Very similar to his second match in WWF when he won the world title. So,
right.
Again, lots of parallels, and this time period there's going to be a lot of parallels between WWF and WCW. And at this point, Bash of the Beast 94 was WCW's highest grossing pay-per-view. It had the most buys in their company's history up to this moment. And it just took one guy in the main event for that to happen. Now, Hogan would lose steam later on, getting into 96, where the fans would turn on, they start booing him. But, off the gate, they did pretty well with him. Understand this, Ric Flair was booking at the time, so that's why you see a lot of Ric Flair Hulk Hogan matches that we never got to see in WWF. But you also see a lot of these goofy, Ric Flair retired 8 times during that time period. He got beat by Hogan and retired, he got beat by Hogan again. Never really got that signature win over Hogan on pay-per-view. Basically, Hogan was dominating the feud.
Yeah.
He moved on from Ric Flair to go to Vader, which they had a lot of interest there. Obviously, Hogan versus another big guy. Again, a Hogan staple. Hogan versus the indestructible, big fat dude. But Vader could really work, and Vader was always pushed pretty well in WCW. He had that great feud with Sting. He was killing guys. So putting Hogan and Vader really quickly, they had that feud happen really quickly when he appeared in '94. So they really started that feud after Hulk Hogan's victory over the Butcher. Yes, Brutus Beefcake had a main event at Starrcade against Hulk Hogan in 1994. That was the main event, folks. So
the Booty Man.
The Booty Man. So it was good to be Hogan's friends. And again, this time period, it's Hogan and friends. So at this point, WCW is bringing a lot of former WWF guys. Would it be the Big Boss Man? They got Mean Gene. They got Bobby Heenan. They got the Earthquake, who was renamed Avalanche. They got the Booty Man, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, Ed Leslie, what have you. Coming in, Kamala's in. The Nasty Boys, particularly because they're really big Hogan, fans.
Yep.
That's Hogan's buddies there, so they got to come in. So Honky Tonk Man came in for 2 shows before he walked out. But you saw a lot of big stars from the WWF who may still have a little bit left in the tank, a little bit, not a whole lot, but they basically were brought in to make Hogan feel more comfortable. And the irony of that is, as these WWF guys came in, they're losing some of their identity in terms of being WCW. Now they spent majority of '93, kind of putting really good wrestlers in great positions. Their mid card was actually extremely strong with Steve Austin, like Kevin Sullivan, Cactus Jack, Terry Funk, Arn Anderson, Johnny B. Bad,
Johnny B. Bad,
Steven Regal, DDP. So on and so forth. So when a lot of these WWF guys, you'll start seeing, Dustin Rhodes, you will start seeing these guys get released. And it's funny, guys like Steve Austin, Cactus Jack, Triple H, Dustin Rhodes, who were on the mid-card or lower mid-card in the case of Triple H, they came in to WWF and created a boom period over there for them. So essentially, and I find this ironic a little bit, that the WWF, the Monday Night War, with mid-carders from WCW. And if you would have told me in 1997 that WWF was going to win the Monday Night War and lose both Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, I would have called you a damn fool, because that's impossible. But they did, and they did. So Matt, what are your memories from this time frame?
Well, they're spotty at times. It was what I used to call the beginning of the end, because I hated Hogan growing up. I did not like him in WWF. And then it was like, there was always the WCW, like, I like the Horsemen, or like that kind of era of that wrestling. And when he came there, I was like, And at first it was like, okay, well, maybe because Flair's calling the shots, they're going to have a different ending. They didn't. And
creative control, brother.
They never understood the power of a villain that's really powerful. And I give the example of having Brock Lesnar come in and absolutely destroy John Cena, re-level the playing field. They never had that with Hogan, really. Not to any real degree. And that's, I think, what was missing. It was never that, like even when Cena got beat up by Brock, it was like he should have taken time off and been like, you know what, I gotta rethink my strategy. They could have done the Rocky montage, him training, So if they had Vader go in and just destroy Hogan. I mean, just destroy him, bloody him, blah, blah, blah. The fans have been like in shock, like the whole Undertaker type shock,
Fucking, and then Hogan hulked up out of a Vader powerbomb. No sells it. So if Vader hits him with a powerbomb, he stands right back up. And you're like, fuck, he's done.
See, if I was Vader, I would have stiffed him.
I probably did know Vader. Vader was stiff as it was. If he stiffed him, I don't think Hogan would know the difference.
True, but I think if they had done it the right way, and then you have Hogan get stretchered out, he broke a rib, whatever it is, he was trouble breathing, and then you have the montage of Hogan training brother, finding himself, and he goes back and he works with and he has to go to find someone to train to give him the killer instinct, and he goes to Ric Flair, and they had that Flair trains him, helps him overcome Vader because he overcame Vader. Remember?
93 Starrcade.
Right, Starrcade. That was a great match.
First appearance of Charlotte Flair, by the way, on a pay-per-view.
Oh wow, there you go. And you'd have that aspect of Hogan going to his enemy for Killer Edge, and Ric Flair trains him up. Hogan wins the title, and then Flair turns on him.
Nice.
That would have been fantastic. Great build-up, an extension of the feud, and then or what if Hogan gets there and Flair turns on him? He's working with Vader.
Funny because as soon as Hogan came in, now Flair had to have been a babyface for about a year and a half.
Right.
He came back from WWF, had the TV show and what have you, and he was a babyface. He was feuding with this guy, feuding with Vader, feuding with Rick Rude, that kind of stuff. So the angle they had going in is that Hogan was coming in, Rick was pissed and now super paranoid. And now he was like, Hulk Hogan's coming in, and they basically turned him heel because Hulk Hogan was coming in. He didn't want Hogan here, all that shit. I think the Hogan-Flair matches work better in WCW because I think WCW had an attachment to Flair. They knew who Hulk Hogan was. Their fans, a lot of their fans watched both shows. But when you had Flair coming up to WWF, a lot of those people didn't really know who he was or why he was important. He was some weird-looking dude with white hair. You know what I mean? So I think it worked a hell of a lot better in WCW. than it did in WWF. And we can't talk about this time in wrestling history without talking about my favorite staple of all time, the Dungeon of Doom. Dungeon of Doom is one of those like guilty pleasures of mine where it's so bad it's actually really good. It started off with Kevin Sullivan hating Hulk Hogan because Hulk Hogan took his brother away, Dave Sullivan. Dave Sullivan being the #1 Hulkamaniac.
Yes, Evac.
Yes. Sullivan created the Three Faces of Fear, which was himself. It was himself, Avalanche, and the Butcher, Beefcake. At that point, it gets kind of murky. Hogan defeats the Three Faces of Fear. Brutus does something where he had lost his memory and he's the man with no name. That was his gimmick. He was the man with no name. But later on, in 1995, Sullivan was kind of hearing voices on his head. He went to go seek out the Master. And the Master being Curtis Iaukea, the Sullivan, my son. That's where that comes from. So the Taskmaster seeks out the Master. He wants him to create a Dungeon of Doom that was able to destroy Hulkamania. So the group was basically a bunch of guys with crazy gimmicks, but guys that Hogan had feuded with in the past. So it consisted of Kamala, the Ugandan Giant, Avalanche, Earthquake, John Tenta, whatever you want to call him, Zodiac, who was Brutus Beefcake's new gimmick name, Ming, who was also Haku. Vader was there for a little bit before he quit the company. And then they got the Giants, who is the Big Show, Paul White, who claimed to be the son of Andre the Giant.
Yes.
In addition, they got other members like the One Man Gang, Hugh Morris, Big Bubba Rogers, Loch Ness, and the Yeti. Do you remember that angle when when they found a block of ice from the Arctic and the ice explodes and the Yeti comes out?
I think I blocked that out of my memory.
Well, that was in the main event of my favorite WCW pay-per-view of that time, which is Halloween Havoc 1995, where it's machine versus machine. So the Giant faced Hulk Hogan in a sumo monster truck match. After the match, the Giant falls off the top of the Cobo Hall and dies. But makes it back in time for the main event. And this is the Giant's first match in WCW, second match ever. Just keep that in mind. The Giant wins the match by disqualification when Jimmy Hart interferes and turns on Hogan. He hits the referee with the microphone, so Hogan is disqualified because Jimmy Hart's his manager. So the next night, Hart reveals that he had put a clause in the contract saying this championship could change hand on disqualification, making the Giant the new champion. So the Giant wins the championship on his first match ever in WCW, second match of all time.
Wow.
Well, I love that pay-per-view. It's fantastic. It's one
where Abdul the Butcher gets electrocuted?
No, that is, I believe, 1991 Halloween Havoc. But yeah, Halloween Havoc, that's a pay-per-view that they should bring back because I think it's a fantastic name.
I think it's Autumn Anarchy.
Oh.
That's essentially what Autumn Anarchy is.
Yes.
But yes, it played to a lot of the strengths, and I've always said that, having the traditional format of the vendetta-fueled manager who just, brings in heel after heel to go after the face or faces he hates is a great vehicle to get some guys some exposure.
Especially when you have the monsters.
Right. And if they don't speak well, you have a mouthpiece there for them. And then when they learn how to do their own interviews fairly well, they can break off on their own and do their own thing or what have you.
No, I definitely agree. And this was a strange time in professional wrestling. But it was the foundation of the big boom period. It was the foundation of your Attitude Era, your Monday Night War. This was the spark because they started getting guys in like Sabu. They started getting the Public Enemy, the Raven, Rey Mysterio, Conan, Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko. The list goes on, and they have really solidified their mid-card. Now you have your shenanigans at your main event, and we all know that. Then when Hogan turned heel and WWE was formed, they're off to the races. So, much like this game, WCW versus the World, this game was the foundation of all the great games you will see moving forward during this time frame. It would be No Mercy, which a lot of people think is the greatest wrestling game of all time, and I can't really dispute that. WCW NWO Revenge, which is fantastic. Another great game. You have Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, again, another fantastic game. WCW NWO World Tour, which is another awesome game. And you have what I consider the greatest game of all time. That could be disputed, folks. Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 for the Nintendo 64. Again, when we talk about even today's wrestling, when we look at today's wrestling, you have to put pieces in place. And yeah, it may not make sense and it may suck and the ratings may not reflect it. But when you get all the pieces put in the right spot, and then you create a boom. And I think in current wrestling right now, I think they're putting the right pieces in place, getting the right talent in, and I think that in a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe this time 6 months, we will see another boom period again. Because they're right there, they're real close. Now, can they mess it up? Absolutely. But I think right now, in the first time in many, many years, that the decisions leading up to right this second, where I think we're about to hit a boom period.
I hope so.
I think we all hope so. I mean, that's going to be the thing. I think all of us, are wrestling fans. Wrestling fans are like sports fans, and I'll tell you why in this particular environment. Now, I listen to a lot of sports talk radio, and you'll see if, say, the Mets are not doing well, they'll call up and they'll bitch about the Mets. Oh, they suck. They should trade this player. They should fire the manager. They should fire the GM, and that happens a lot, especially on talk radio. And I think wrestling fans are very similar to where they go on the internet and think, oh, this storyline sucks. They need to fire the writers. I don't want to see Stephanie and Triple H on TV, blah, 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 blah. But it comes from a positive place because they want wrestling to be great, just like Mets fans want the Mets to be great. So, there's so much, investment in there that's why it comes off and comes across the way it does. So my final verdict on this game, the game is lots of fun. The controls are right there. Again, they're not as fluid as the later games. But again, as a first attempt, as a blueprint for future games, I think it's a great model. The engines vary slightly from the N64 games, from the PlayStation 1 games. So we'll go into that a little bit more when we talk about Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. Redundant, I guess. The Nintendo 64 had the thing of damning stuff 64. It was weird. I think.
Yes.
But God bless them anyway. So that's all the time we have on tonight's show. Join us next time when we go on a world tour. For Matt Riley, I'm Alex G, and you've been listening to and watching Retro Wrestling Games Presents WCW